Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. Thanks for your patience this morning. We had to just work out a few technical problems that we've worked through. So if you have any questions during this presentation, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom webinar toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 14th edition of Crop Talk. And this week, as harvest has started a bit in some areas and going to be kind of getting into full gear here, depending on the weather, I guess, but it's ramping up. I thought it'd be a good time to talk about, I guess, preparing the crop for harvest and talk a little bit about harvest management, pre-harvest desiccations, and then also a bit of a weed update from Kim. Been seeing some water hemp and thought it would be a good idea to kind of give an update on that as to where it is and how far it's gone in the province right now. After that, there's been a couple of questions that have come in and we can deal with those. So I guess with that, let's turn it over to Kim and get started here.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. Yeah, so I've already started on my first slide here. Just let me know if anything is not working out. But basically, we're talking
about seeing it, Kim. Kim, do you want to share again, please?
I have to share again. Sorry, I don't know. Just 1 second. I don't know how to share again. Where is that? Here? Okay. Yes. This one.
There we go.
There you go.
Are we good?
Good.
You bet.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, I thought it was already up. Just been having lots of issues this morning. Okay, so what purpose, we're talking about harvest management. So what purpose are we trying to fulfill here? Crop dry down, weed dry down, or all three? Okay, so what product? Roundup, heat, or Reglone? Now, I know we've got lots of generic products. I'm going to be talking about the heritage products here. I'm going to be talking about the brand names. As always, I like to talk about those because I know those ones the best. With generic products, there's usually no product support. Lots of the registrations aren't exactly the same as with the brand name products. So I am going to be talking about mostly, again, the brand name products here, Roundup, Heat, and Reglone. And should you choose to use something else, then just make sure you know the ins and outs of that product. And the biggest thing, and I've got that there in bold, is know your market. Just because it's registered doesn't mean your buyer will accept it. So always check with your buyer. You know, there's a disclaimer that you have to sign when you sell your grain, and you have to make sure that you have used acceptable registered products all the way through the life of that crop, from the beginning right to the very end. So make sure you are checking with your buyer before you're putting those last few products on the crop. So when we're talking about Roundup or glyphosate, basically you have to put this on when grain moisture is less than 30%, because anything more than 30%, you're actually going to get some of that glyphosate pulled into the seed, and that is going to show up in MRLs, which are maximum residue limits, but it's also going to affect germination of that seed. It's going to affect seed dry down. If your seeds are too plump and they're over the 30% moisture, they'll actually dry up and shrivel a little bit too if you put Roundup in, because you're basically killing that plant before that seed is physiologically mature. Because at 30% or under 30%, then all you're doing is just losing moisture out of that seed. Anything over 30% moisture, you're still going to get moisture coming into that seed, and you're going to take some of that glyphosate along with it if you've sprayed too early. So you always should spray probably a little bit later than you think you should. So wheat, barley, oats, canary seed, we want to be the hard dough stage, and I've got some pictures coming up in a minute, so I'll show you all those. Canola and mustard, the pods need to be green to yellow. Most seeds are yellow to brown. With peas, the majority, 75 to 80%, the pods are brown, and with flax, the majority, 75 to 80% of the bolls are brown. Roundup is for pre-harvest perennial weed control. It's not desiccation. If you're doing desiccation, you're going to be waiting a long time. you need a good 10 days to 2 weeks for this to work and really dry that crop down and get those weeds dried down as well. So now we've got really great weather right now. That might speed up a little bit, but if you're talking doing some desiccation or doing some application in September and we start to get cool and our days are getting shorter and our nights are cold, it's just going to take longer. So you need to make sure you are banking on the right amount of time if you're planning on getting in there and harvesting anytime before the next couple of weeks. We want water volume to be at 10 gallons. We just want lots of coverage. We know Roundup is a systemic herbicide, but we still want lots of coverage. We're spraying big crops. We're trying to get all areas of the crop, all areas of the plant covered. And so coverage is still crucial, even with a systemic product like glyphosate. So there are other crops on the label that I won't really talk about, but there are many crops on the glyphosate label: chickpea, lentil, lupins, fabas, dry bean, camelina, soybeans, and forages as well. So this is from the Keep It Clean site. Now these slides are actually a little bit older. The site is updated all the time. In fact, it was updated as of June of 2024. So, but I like some of these older slides. But just to talk about general glyphosate information, it's registered for pre-harvest weed control. It's not to be used as a desiccant. Again, we've got to be under that 30% moisture. Always follow the label application rate because for timing and pre-harvest intervals, because we need to make sure the maximum residue limit is not exceeded. And never harvest earlier than recommended. And again, that's because that can increase the risk of unacceptable residues in the harvested grain. And so if you're using glyphosate with other products like saflufenicil or the heat brands, you still need to be applying when the grain moisture content is less than 30% in the least mature part of the field. So that's really important. I know we've got some really stagey crops this year, but you need to be on the least mature. You need to be staging it as to the least mature part of the field, and you follow the pre-harvest interval of the most restrictive product label. And with something like heat, you're putting that on a little bit later anyways, so you would never be putting that on any earlier than the 30% moisture, grain moisture. And so again, here's some pictures from the Keep It Clean website when we're looking at canola. When we're talking, you basically can separate that plant into the top third, the middle third, and the bottom third of the plant. The bottom third of the plants, we want to be basically the seeds are brown, completely brown black. The middle third of the plant over here on this side, if you guys can see my cursor, we want them to be mostly brown with some speckling. And the top third of the plant, they can still be green, but they don't want to be squishy. If you roll them between your thumb and forefinger, they don't squish, they're still green. So that's an acceptable stage, but we don't want them to be squishy. If they're squishing and they're wet, then you need to wait a bit. So what to look for, basically 50 to 60% color change over the whole plant, and again, over the least mature parts of the field. And again, the top is green and firm to roll. The middle is brown with some speckling, and the bottom is completely brown to black. And the recommended harvest is 7 to 14 days after pre-harvest glyphosate application. So this is for cereals. Here's wheat. So we can see here, this is what we call the hard dough stage, when when you press into that seed with your thumbnail and you still see this dent right here. This stage over here, it's just too immature still. It's very soft. There'll be more squishy. There'll be some white starchy stuff come out. Or if you put your thumbnail imprint in, it pops, and you take your thumbnail away, it just pops right back out. So again, the recommended harvest on this is 7 to 14 days. And again, just to reiterate, be informed, the wheat may not be accepted if it's treated with pre-harvest glyphosate. Always check with your grain buyer when you're applying. For barley, basically don't use it on malt barley. We're looking again for that 30%, less than 30% moisture. So the same thing, that hard dough stage. And again, barley may not be accepted if treated with pre-harvest glyphosate. Check with your grain buyer. So even if it's a feed barley, just still check. But we know malt barley, it is not an acceptable use. With oats, what to look for, again, less than 30% moisture. The kernel is firm and reasonable pressure from your thumbnail leaves a dent. Again, at the hard dough stage, recommended harvest is 7 to 14 days. And again, with oats, especially check with your buyers, because not all buyers will accept glyphosate desiccation. So with peas, what to look and listen for is most of the pods. So 80% of the pods are yellow to golden brown, and seeds in the bottom pods are detached and they will rattle in the pods. So you can hear that. The recommended harvest is minimum 7 days after pre-harvest. And again, check with your buyers as well, because not all buyers will accept glyphosate treated peas treated for pre-harvest. With faba beans, basically we want, again, say grain moisture less than, in this case, this picture up here, this grain moisture is greater than 30%. The leaves in the pods are starting to turn yellow, but it's too early. So these beans are still very big. They're still very large. And you can see they have this white skin kind of attached in there, but this pod is very green. We've just got too many green leaves and yellow leaves on here. This is a much better picture. We're looking at these lower pods here are going to be this dark brown and black. Our seeds are now, they've shrunk down a little bit. The grain moisture here is less than 30%. Even though we do see an awful lot of green leaves still on here, we are looking at these bottom pods here, and they need to be in this stage versus something like this in this picture up here. And again, here's just another picture here. These are really mature now, and most pods are dark brown or black, and the grain moisture in this case is 20% or less. And you can see these now are detached, and they've got they're sunk into the pod. There's like a little well that they kind of sit in here. And so these pods are really, really black. So this would be, this is where we would consider 20% moisture or less. And again, check with your buyers, because not all buyers will accept faba beans treated with pre-harvest glyphosate. With dry beans, what to look and to listen for. Again, we want 80, we need to be listening as well, because we want the pods, the bottom pods the seeds are going to rattle in the lowest pods, but we do want 80 to 90% of the leaves have dropped and the pod color will change to the mature color. Pod color changes about 80% as well. The upper pods are still yellow though, but again, listen and look for those seeds to be rattling in those bottom pods. And again, most bean dryers do not accept beans treated with pre-harvest glyphosate, so check with your grain buyer before applying. When we're talking about heat, the heat brands, which is saflufenicil, wheat and barley, but that's registered for feed only. We're talking the hard dough stage, which is Zadoc stage 87, or seeds less than 30% moisture. With canola, we want 80% of the seeds have changed color. With peas, the majority of the pods are brown, which is 70 to 80%. With dry beans, the stems are green to brown. Pods are mature, which is yellow to brown, and 80 to 90% of the leaves have dropped. With fabas, 80% of the lower pods have turned black. The middle pods are yellow to tan, and the top green pods have firm seeds. So when you press on that seed, you can't split them in half. They're not going to split in half, and they're certainly not squishy at all. With flax, 75% of the bolls have turned color. With heat, basically the purpose of heat is to speed the rate of dry down of crops and green weedy material. You apply in the heat of the day between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Use all of the merge. There's a couple of rates you can use, but it's recommended to use all of the merge. Can be used alone or tank mixed with or basically 360 grams active of glyphosate. The water volume should be 10 to 20 gallons. We want to get lots of coverage. Heat is a contact herbicide, so we need to get lots and lots of coverage on that. The pre-harvest interval on this is 2 to 3 days if it's used on its own. And other crops are registered: chickpeas, red lentils, soybeans, sunflowers, triticale, flax as well. So here's just some pictures from the BSF website. So optimal timing on canola is when 80% of the seeds have changed color. Canola timing cannot be determined by pod color. You have to open those pods and take a look at the seeds inside. Lots of times too, particularly on those upper pods, we can get some sunburning or some color change. Sometimes that's very variety specific. So you can't go by pod color. You have to be opening those pods and looking at the seeds. Again, now we know canola flowers, it's an indeterminate crop, so it flowers upwards, which means the lowermost pods are the most mature and the uppermost pods are going to be the least mature. And again, seeds on the bottom, 2/3 to 3/4 need to be changed to dark brown or black. So they need to be just a little bit further along than if you were spraying straight glyphosate. With Reglone, which are the dicot products, canola now, we need to be 90% or more of the seed has to be brown. With peas, the bottom pods are ripe and dry. The seeds are detached from the pods. With flax, 75% of the bolls are brown, and dry beans, red and white kidney, 80 to 90% of the leaves are lost and 80% of the pods are yellow. And with fabas, most pods are ripe and dry. The pods are fully filled. The bottom pods are black or tan in color. With Reglone, the purpose of using Reglone is to dry the immature green material at the top of indeterminate crops and green weeds to facilitate harvest. So it will not speed the maturity of green crops. So your crops have to be very far along before you put Reglone on, because it works fast and you will not get any more maturity coming along. So basically what you've sprayed is what you're going to get. You apply in the morning or evening, not in the direct sunlight during the middle of the day. Actually, ideally a cool cloudy day following, or basically not a bright sunshiny day following, is the best to make Reglone work, because it works very fast. You actually don't want it to work too fast. You want to try to slow it down a bit, which is why we apply morning or evening and not in the direct sunlight, because it works too fast then. The water volume is minimum 20 gallons. Pre-harvest interval, canola 7 to 10 days. Peas and flax, basically when the sample test dries. Faba is 4 to 7 days. Other crops on the label are soybeans, sunflowers, chickpeas, potatoes, forages for seed production. So here's some pictures from Syngenta. Basically, the green seed levels will not decrease after the application of Reglone ion. So these here are too immature. And in canola, you need to spray when 90% or more of the individual seeds have turned brown on the entire plant across the whole field. So again, we've got to be making sure the whole field looks like this. You have to be staging. And if the field is very stagey, or like there's lots of different growth stages in there, you need to be staging it at the least, or at the most immature area in that field, or the one that's the least furthest along, because you're going to lock in that green seed if you spray too early. With field peas, it's time to apply Reglone when the upper pods, again, up here, they're fleshy and green and starting to turn yellow. The seeds may be immature, but they're not going to split. They're not going to be squishy. In the middle pods, the seeds are light green to yellow and somewhat shrunken and leathery. The seeds are full size and soft, but not juicy. Seeds will split when squeezed. Oh, sorry, I said that wrong. You just don't want them to be, juicy. Sorry, I guess they still may split, but they still need to be drier. Bottom pods, they're dry and translucent, and the seeds are detached from the pods. And then harvest timing, field peas will be ready for combining 5 to 7 days after spraying, depending on the weather conditions. And if significant rainfall occurs after application, the period between desiccation and harvest could be extended. So you really watch the weather forecast with Reglone, because crops will come in very fast. And if you do end up with some more adverse weather for harvesting after you've applied Reglone, it will extend that period for that Reglone works. And sometimes too, you can actually get greening up of crop after. So just really be ready to, when you're using Reglone, it works really well. It works really fast, and just be ready. You need to be ready to combine as soon as the crops are ready to go once you've used Reglone. So what can be applied by air? The glyphosate brands. Now, what we've got in our book so far, or this year in the 2024 Guide to Crop Protection, we've got not Credit 45, or Crusher Plus, or Glyphorce WDG, or Matrix, or the Shotgun brands. Those are not registered to apply by air, but you still should be checking with other labels just to confirm. With Diquat, it can be applied by air, but you need to be minimum 18 liters per acre water volume, and the heat brands can be applied by air for desiccation use only. So that is what is on the labels of those products. So with that, I just want to show you some pictures and talk a little bit about water hemp, and then I can answer questions on either of these subjects after, or we can take them at the end, whatever Lionel wants. I'll just start with some pictures. We've been seeing, I mean, it's August, so it's I'm on pigweed patrol now for the next couple of months, and we're basically seeing lots of water hemp showing up again. We know we've got it in many places in the province. We have maps on our website that shows all of the RMs where we have had confirmed by DNA analysis water hemp. So we know there's loads of, I think as of last year, we were at 20 different RMs, and we've added another couple already this year. So we know that the water hemp is moving north and west, but everybody needs to be watching for it. And in areas where water hemp has been present, it's showing up in new fields all the time. So just a couple of pictures here. This is actually a wheat field that was quite infested with water hemp last year when it was in soybeans. And, you know, wheat is a very competitive crop, but you get into a wheat field, you know, you can see there's a row here, there's a row here, there's a row here in the middle, but we do have a bit of a gap here. I think it was about a foot, or maybe, I'm not sure, 18 inches of row where there just wasn't any wheat. That happens sometimes. This is right on the edge of the field. You know, when it was really wet this spring, there just isn't any wheat. And you can start to see in this area where there's not a lot of crop competition, we do have water hemp just starting to grow now. And so this is the edge of a canola field, and this canola field, there's just a couple of plants showing up here. I'll just show you some more pictures. Again, normally within the body of a canola crop, we tend not to see water hemp at all. But again, if there's going to be any bare spots, this is that same canola field. This is just right on the edge between the edge of the canola field and the ditch. I think it was quite wet there this year. There was quite a few spots along the edge of this particular canola field that didn't get seeded. You can see where, you know, the seeder had swerved to go around some wetter areas, and those areas are full of water hemp right now. So they're not in the body of the canola crop, but they're just kind of lurking there right on the edge. And there's a lot of plants there. This is kind of what it looks like staring straight down at this. When you're looking at water hemp, lots of times it does look like a pigweed, but sometimes these leaves are longer and narrower. This is a good example of this leaf right here, but sometimes they do look very much like just a regular red root pigweed. But usually they're bigger, but that's, you know, a little hard to tell too, because you don't know when they germinated. We've got some that have freshly germinated that are just tiny still, but they tend to be, so with pictures like this, when you're looking down at them, sometimes they look a bit like a poinsettia when you're staring straight down at them, but they do tend to be that little bit of a darker green. Here's another picture of that canola field where we've got an area where the farmer had swerved around, you know, a wet area right on the edge of the ditch and didn't plant any canola there. And this little patch is just solid weeds. There's other things in here too, but there's a heck of a lot of water hemp in here as well. So again, we didn't see anything in the body of this canola crop. It was very thick, very nice canola back in here, but just on the edge, there's some big patches here that actually they need to, and they've been mowed out. So looking in the bottom of some of the ditches that have been wet and where there's been water hemp in the area, we've got those ditches were very wet for a very long time this year because we've been so moist. And now looking down, this is all water hemp growing now. These ditches have dried up. There's actually some big cracks in them, but this is a very typical water hemp plant right here. Very long and narrow leaves compared to a red root pigweed. But there's lots in here. This is much more looking like a pigweed leaf, but it's still a water hemp. So these plants can look, they look like pigweeds, and they can look like this one, which does look very different. And you'd look at that and know, okay, I know that's not red root pigweed, but there's other ones like this over here that are hard to tell. But again, this is just the bottom of a ditch next to a field. So you know, you've got to be watching all of the areas around the field. So the edges, the ditches, not just within the body of the field. So what to look for? Leaves tend to be longer, narrower, and more glossy green than red root pigweed, but not always. It can look very much like red root pigweed. And I do find a lot of them that germinate a little bit later in the year look quite different than the ones that are germinating early on. They have a lot less leaves on them. They just look different. This is a weed that is a real chameleon. It looks like a lot of different things. And so it's hard to know just by looking at it until you get to know it well, which I've seen enough of it now. I can tell, but hopefully not very many other people can, because we don't want to have that much of it in the province yet, but we know it's here. We've got to be watching. Definitely though, one of the things is a smooth hairless stem. That stem just feels really, really nice and smooth. Very, very different feeling than a few of the other pigweeds. It has a poinsettia look when seen directly from above. Once we get seed heads on it, which we do have some now that are fully in seed, the ones that have germinated the very earliest this year, they have a long, snaky seed head, not bottle brush, like not short and compact, like red root pigweed. And it can be any size. If you see the big ones look down, there's probably smaller ones too. Where to look for it. Soybean fields, especially if they only received glyphosate and or group 2 herbicide post. So if you haven't had any pre-emerge on that had residual control, and you've only put glyphosate on, which is still happening way too much. And even we've seen it in a field where they had used an imazamox bentazone post. Now, most of the water hemp that we found in Manitoba is coming preloaded with resistance. It's already resistant to group 9, which is glyphosate. It's already resistant to group 2, which imazamox is a group 2. And the bentazone part of that just isn't going to do a good job anyways. That's a contact herbicide. That's Bazagran. And so we do have a new infestation in the St. Claude area in a soybean field that did receive imazamox bentazone, but there's still lots of water hemp in there because that didn't work on it. Also cornfields that have only received glyphosate or a group 2 post if you were using something like a sortan, because we know that a lot of the water hemp is, or most of the water hemp is all group 2 resistant. Cornfields, it is very hard to find water hemp because corn is tall. And unless you're going to be walking up and down the rows, which I know we're not going to do, You're not going to find it if it's in the body of a cornfield, but you can watch for it along the edges, again, especially particularly along ditches that have been flooding, where there's always water movement. And if you're in an area where there has been water hemp around, and then those seeds could be moving up and down those ditches. So you can see it, and you can look along the edges of the cornfields, or if you have any gaps in that cornfield, if there's any seeding gaps and there's missing plants, that's where I'd be looking for the water hemp. But again, it's harder to see. We almost always find it for the first time in a soybean field, because about this time of year, it's starting the earliest germinating ones, the ones that have been growing for the longest, they are now sticking up above the crop. And the crop is not getting any taller now, but the water hemp is. So every week or every day you go by, you'll see more plants pop up above and just get taller and taller. So this is when you can easily find the water hemp doing the drive-by field scoutings. So also where to look is any crop in a field where water hemp has been found before. So canola and cereals are competitive, but water hemp is going to be in the thinner areas. It's going to be in the bare patches. It's going to be in the field edges, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very opportunistic weed. It needs highlight intensity. So it does get choked out when you've got a competitive crop. But again, if you have any bare areas and there's seed in the ground, it's going to germinate, and it's going to take advantage of those thinner bare areas where it's not, the crop competition is not there. And as crops dry down and the canopy opens up, water hemp will germinate and grow. So you're going to see more and more of it coming as our crops are maturing. And we need to have a fall weed control program, as water hemp will continue to grow after harvest. Anything that gets cut at harvest is going to regrow from below that cut line, and will set seed before freeze up. And of course, once you've just got stubble and you don't have any crops, you've got highlight intensity now. Lots of bare ground showing again, and really lots of opportunity for water hemp to germinate. And we will find it can germinate after harvest and set seed before freeze up. There'll be very small plants by that point, but they will still have some seed on them. And you can guarantee if the original plant, the plant that's growing came from one seed and it's resistant, then all of the seeds growing on that are going to be resistant as well. So contact me if you suspect you've got water hemp. Again, it's hard to know visually what it is. I know what it looks like. I'll come and take a look, and we'll get samples into the lab. We'll get it tested. So there's my phone number and there's my email. And again, just please be on the lookout for this, because it's a very aggressive weed, and we just need to get on top of it in all of the new fields and try to keep it from getting that much worse. So that's all I have for those two subjects. Lionel, if you want to take the screen back.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to leave it here, or leave it with you until we get through some of the questions here, okay?
Okay.
Okay, one producer recommendation. I've got lots of volunteer liberated canola in my peas. What would be a good either combination of products or a product to use to get control of that canola?
Well, I guess your peas, I guess depends on the stage of the peas. You could go after it with Roundup or glyphosate, but again, that's really going to depend on the peas, because you don't want there to be like we know peas can get dry really fast, especially we've got really hot weather right now. And so I know we're combining here in central Manitoba. I just don't know exactly the stage of the peas, but I do know lots of guys are going on peas, and we don't want to wait too long on those and get those too dry. So if you were using a glyphosate, that would really depend on the staging. You'd have to still make sure you've got time to get that glyphosate to work, because that's going to take a little bit longer. Yeah, but again, either of the other two products, I think you just need to go by staging. I mean, you've just got, you really only have 3 products to pick from. And if your peas are really ready to go and you want to do them fast, yeah, then you'd have to be looking at, if you're ready to go, then something like a diquat. Right. But again, I think that's going to depend on the pea staging and how quickly you want to get in there, and harvest, or how quickly you should get in there, because we just don't want those peas sitting out there for too terribly long.
Yeah, I think I know the field, so it's probably still in almost full flower.
Oh gosh. Okay, so
the peas are starting to ripen, but the canola's it's flowering.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and again, if you're using, like, if you use, again, the Roundup, if the peas are, it's just, like I said, it's just going to be when you need to harvest and get those peas off, because we do know we need to get peas in the bin as quickly as we can. Depending on the market, depending how much they're going to take, because they get dry. They're not an oil seed, right? So they're not as, yeah, it's not like combining soybeans where you have a little bit more give to them. They get dry really fast, and we're in some hot weather right now. So I think you just have to look at what your timeline is for harvesting and when you want to be harvesting, and then back that up and see like which product would work the best. Because like I said, you've only got the 3 to choose from. But and it's just the speed of harvest. Depending on the product, Roundup takes the longest. Roundup plus heat, or heat on its own, is in the middle, and Reglone is by far the fastest. But all of those products will take out flour, like Liberty canola. You just have to have lots of coverage as well with heat and dicot. You have to have the coverage on those ones. It will still take out a big, or dry down a big flour in canola.
Okay, and how much water, like, can you go too much water?
I don't know if you could. I mean, technically, I guess if you sprayed a plant to the point of runoff where the water's running off, but when you look at how much water we're putting on an acre, I would always just go to the maximum. There's usually a range on the label, and we have that in our guide on all the pages and on all the product pages. We do have under application information, there's always a range. Like I'm looking at the dicot page right now, and it says the ground is basically 91 to 222 liter per acre, and aerials 18 liters per acre. So on the ground application, I would go to the high end, but I wouldn't go any higher than that. And usually that's a high end. That's a lot of water to be hauling. So go as high as the label recommendation, but no higher than that.
Yeah, I think he was talking 20 gallon if she
was. Yeah, I wouldn't go less than 20 gallons. I think 20 gallons is a good starting place. 20 gallons is good. Beyond, but like I said, just you've got to stick to the label.
Okay, and will pre-harvest do anything to water hemp?
I guess if it's, I would say nothing. It's not going to do anything to the water hemp that's here that's glyphosate resistant. So glyphosate's not going to work. You're going to get some burn off on it, but the problem is it's an annual weed. You're going to get burn off, and the problem is if you've got the big ones already, they've already got seed on them. But yeah, if you do get, they're very big and green. The burn off products should work. We do know some of the water hemp is group 14 resistant, so I'm not sure how well heat may work on some of it, but we don't have a good handle on which group 14s. We just know from some of the testing we've been doing is that the group 14 resistance is showing up on some of the water hemp seed, but I wouldn't be able to tell you whether or not, it'll vary from field to field, and it's going to vary on the water hemp populations in those fields. But we do know we do have some group 14 resistance. So I can't guarantee how well a group 14 is going to work, and heat is a saprophenicol is group 14. So we haven't really seen that, haven't really seen it where anybody's been desiccating and the water hemp has really escaped. But again, we have water hemp in a number of fields in Manitoba, but it's still a relatively small number of fields. So I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I know the Roundup is not going to work. I can guarantee you. I don't think we have any samples we've done over the hundreds of samples we've done over the last couple of years. I mean, we take many samples out of each field too. So, right. So, but when we're looking at the hundreds of water hemp samples, they're basically all glyphosate resistant. So glyphosate's not going to work.
Would you recommend using an NIS with Reglone when even with built-in surfactant?
That's something to talk to your Syngenta people about that, because the Reglone ion does have the surfactant in it, and I think that's something to talk to them about. I would do what they recommend. Lots of times just with a non-ionic surfactant, it just helps get you that little bit extra. Like it helps it stick a little bit better. It helps it cover a little bit better. So yeah, I would talk to your company rep on that one.
Okay, and okay, so you showed the picture of that small water hemp in the wheat field, and so the question, I guess you answered this, is will it still make seed this fall?
Yep. Yep, not a lot, but some. I was actually just talking to Joe Ikley yesterday. He's in North Dakota where he's at NDSU. He's a professor there, and he's been up to Manitoba quite a bit. They've been dealing with water hemp for a heck of a lot longer than we have. And he had actually gathered some last year that actually germinated after harvest, and he counted, and they had 100 seeds. They were averaging about 100 seeds, I guess. So he found some small plants, shelled them out, and they had 100 seeds. So not a lot, because the bigger water hemp plants right now can have, I don't know, 400,000, maybe 500,000 seeds in them, which is, a lot of seed. But even 100 seeds is too many because they're all resistant. So yeah, even those tiny, tiny little ones that are going to germinate after harvest are capable of still having, like I said, up to 100 seeds in them, maybe more, depending on how long of a fall we get.
Okay, good. That's all the questions I have for you right now, Kim, but you'll hang on for a minute here, I think,
Yeah.
yet?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna jump over to the crop scouting panel, and like I mentioned, there was a couple of things that came in, and actually this one is going to be for you, Kim. I sent you the picture. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but they said it grows about 4 feet tall. It's in the ditches and the sloughs, usually around thistles and cattails. And I guess they must have noticed it when they were cutting hay in the sloughs, and they're wondering if there's any concern for livestock. I guess what it is, and then is there any concern for livestock?
Yeah, I think the picture you showed, I think that's a wild sunflower. I've seen quite a bit of it this year, and there's a couple of different kinds of. There's just generally called a wild sunflower, so I don't know exactly which one it is. I have seen some reports that they say it's toxic, particularly to horses, but I don't have any. I don't really have anything official on that. I do have a few publications on poisonous plants and plants that are poisonous, particularly to livestock, like cattle and horses and sheep and things like that. So again, I've seen a few references that where it's considered to be mildly toxic, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how much they could tolerate. That'd be something that I think you'd have to talk to a feed person about, or one of our forage people about. But the picture that you sent, I'm pretty sure that's just one of the wild sunflowers, and I've seen a lot of it this year. It'll get really tall, has opposite leaves, and kind of the leaves are a bit rough feeling, kind of like a brown-eyed Susan, or even just a regular sunflower leaves. They're just a bit sandpapery almost, but it'll be kind of tall and skinny, and that yellow, very distinctive, looks like a sunflower head. It doesn't really just have all the big black seeds in the middle like our tame sunflowers do, but it's very similar to our tame sunflowers, just a smaller scale.
Yeah, and if you look down the stem here, they're like with the new heads coming, that's kind of like characteristic of wild sunflower too, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good. Okay, thanks for that one. David, I sent you this picture the other day. I was out in the field doing some wheat surveys and for fusarium, and I seen this plant, so I figured I took a few pictures and sent them to you. I was wondering if you could maybe make a few comments on it.
I'm sure that they're just switching over some audio. David, can you unmute yourself if possible? Here we go.
Okay, here I am.
Okay, Dave.
What's up?
Oh, okay. So I put up the picture I sent you the other day when I was doing my wheat fusarium wheat surveys, disease surveys, and I put the picture up that I sent you the other day.
Okay.
And just
and that was that pinky orange color over the whole head.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see the picture on my screen because Kim's is still sharing, I think. But regardless, it would be good if you could show it to people on the call. So
it's Lori. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see. Is it a sorry?
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
This is something that we've seen over the years, I think several times, a little bit last year, a fair amount this year. And those heads are not affected by Fusarium head blight. I know that that color would lead you to think that, but that's not the case. Those heads have died early. If you thresh them out, you'll find there is no grain, or if there is any grain that started to form, it's almost completely shriveled. So that tiller died a month ago, and now it's being colonized by it's a bacterium, not a fungus. I don't need to give you the name, just to know that it is a bacterium, and it's a saprophyte, which is an opportunist. It only grows on dead and decaying tissue. What more to say about that? So what killed that tiller or that head in the first place? Well, we think of whiteheads, and we're quickly drawn to the conclusion it might be something like wheat stem maggot, but that's easy to check. If you take a tug on that head, that stem will come out easily. Haven't seen a lot of wheat stem maggot this year. More likely you will find, if you dig up or uproot the plant, that there is a limited root system, or a root system in which the secondary roots have some brown discoloration. That is more than likely common root rot. Another thing that I've observed, and we wrote about that in the last CropPest update, or perhaps the one before, and that is plants that are affected are often found to be quite shallowly rooted. It seems that the seed germinated fairly close to the surface, and you can tell that by the length of the subcrown internode between the secondary roots, which are more robust, and the primary roots, which are formed where the seed germinates. I've seen that being only a quarter to a half an inch long. So something that had possibility of happening in most places, we had an abundance of moisture in the spring, and everything germinated and came up fine. The plants were not challenged to explore the soil profile, so they would have stayed more shallow during the early part of the year. And then when it dried out suddenly, I think that was kind of mid-July, early to mid-July, and you're not getting a lot of rainfall, the surface soil dries out very quickly, and the roots just can't access deeper soil moisture quickly enough to supply the plant. So it's kind of like a drought almost. But as we know, when a cereal plant begins to suffer that kind of stress, it starts to slough tillers. And those are not generally the main stems if you're looking at the plant. I've been yakking on for quite a while, Lionel, and I don't know if everybody has heard me or.
Yep. No, we can hear you, Dave.
Okay, good.
Yeah, no, good. That's good comments there. And have you been doing, this is a question for me, have you been doing quite a few canola disease surveys yet?
I myself have only done 2 fields, and they were in the Northwest. And one of them had a very high incidence, I should say, of sclerotinia. More than 50% of the plants were infected, and a high percentage of those were not going to produce anything. That was in a field that was unsprayed, and so that's a concern. I discussed that with the grower in the field, and all his other crops had been sprayed, and we went to one of those, and there was a very low level of sclerotinia. There was more blackleg and verticillium stripe in those fields. Of course, those diseases are not controlled by fungicides. So that's a long anecdotal story about one field. The other field also had a significant level of white mold sclerotinia stem rot, and that was a lesser amount, I'd say 20 to 25% plants infected, and many of them just a part of the plant. So it's probably what you would see from a later in the bloom period infection.
Yeah.
What we're seeing from the other survey, I think Sonia could probably comment on that. maybe next time when we'll have had another week of canola surveying. But those are just my observations from the field.
Yeah, and actually good points. I was going to say that I've seen the same thing where surprised, I guess surprised that a lot of the fields are talking to producers. They didn't spray all their fields. They only sprayed some of their fields. And maybe because of the germination in the spring, some of the guys didn't want to go into the extra cost. But definitely those fields are showing more. And I'm seeing it higher up on the plant, as compared to taking the whole plant.
Yeah. Well, as far as management philosophy goes, I would say you spend your money on your better stands. If the stand doesn't look great in the first place, even if it did get infected, it's not the one that's going to make you money. That really bad case that I mentioned, ironically, that was a terrific stand. It was up to my chest and it was hard to walk through. So it will still yield, but it probably had the potential to yield 60 to 65 bushels, and it will now probably produce 20% less or more. Whereas a field that is a poor stand, you spend money on that, it's kind of a bad money after good, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, good points, David. Great, thanks.
Okay.
A few slides to finish up for the week. The spring wheat quality rating. This is from the crop report. So if you're interested in finding more information on the crop report, it's on our website. But just a few things I pulled off. Not a lot of changes in the spring wheat from the previous weeks. I think we're seeing the crop ripen in, and I think we're basically the crop that's there is going to be the crop that's going to be right now. I don't think we're just kind of waiting for it to ripen in. Another chart that's going to be coming up on a weekly basis now is our percentage of harvest completed in Manitoba. And when you look to the different regions here, we're definitely just getting started in most places and with most places it's winter wheat, fall rye, and maybe some peas that are starting to come off in some areas. But regarding spring wheat and barley, just the odd field so far. I did talk to a producer down in the, I guess, Elgin area, Hartney area last week, and he tried some wheat that was in the mid to high 20% moisture. So he was going to be waiting for a few days yet. So, but yeah, we're not far, and I guess it'll depend on what we get for weather as to if we can get some done this week here or not. I mentioned this last week, and maybe spend just a little extra time, maybe explaining a bit more, but it's a project going on between the University of Manitoba, the Sustainable Canadian Ag Partnership, and Manitoba Crop Alliance. And there's their website. So if you're interested in collecting a wheat sample and sending it in to them, so they can do some studying on it. What they're wanting is 300-gram bag. So if you go to that website, they'll give you the instructions on how to get it to them. And so if you're interested in taking part of it, it's basically a pre-harvest sprouting and wheat they're looking at and understanding the mechanisms of the plant. So if you're interested, definitely give them a check on their website. The crop residue burning program started August 1st. So it's doing on a weekly basis now, daily basis. So if you're getting some harvest done or wanting to do some field cleanup, check the website to see if it's a burning day and see if you need to get permission or not, or for burning, depending on the RM you're in. There might be some regular stipulations to doing some burning. The hay listing, there's a lot of bales out there. In my recent travels, you see a lot of bales. So I think yields have been pretty good. And so if you've got hay for sale, I think, a good place to put it would be on our Manitoba hay listing. And you can just contact our 1-800 number if you wanted to get on there or get some hay on that service. And then again, I put the crop residue burning. our MASC service centers, their locations throughout the province, the number. Double check with them, but I think if you have any carryover grain or carryover forage that you need to be letting them know, so it won't count against this year's production. So definitely be checking with them for the deadline for that. I think it is approaching this week here. And that's be it for today. So there's my contact information and Lori Forbes's information. And join us next week, August the 21st, for another edition of Crop Talk. Thanks to the presenters and the panel for answering the questions, and we'll see you next time.